Welcome all to our webinar regarding this amazing partnership between University of Dayton School of Law and Mackenzie Presbyterian University. Thank you all for being here, and we will start with our Reverendo Piacente. Welcome, Reverendo.
Obrigado. Peço a compreensão, mas farei em português. O nosso objetivo aqui é registrar a presença da liderança do Mackenzie por meio da sua chancelaria, mostrar o nosso apoio, o nosso interesse de que esse webinar possa produzir muitos efeitos positivos na construção e na propagação de direitos humanos justos, verdadeiros e que tragam para a nossa sociedade crescimento. Eu vou deixar aqui não só o abraço do nosso chanceler, reverendo Dr. Robinson Grangeiro, mas vou deixar também um texto bíblico que servirá para nos guiar naquilo que o Mackenzie pensa dos direitos humanos. Diz o texto de Jeremias 22:3. Assim diz o Senhor: executai o direito e a justiça, e livrai o oprimido das mãos do opressor. Não oprimais ao estrangeiro, nem ao órfão, nem à viúva. Não façais violência, nem derrameis sangue inocente neste lugar. Nós temos o dever, como líderes, de propagar essas verdades. Esse texto foi dado justamente a Jeremias para que ele falasse com a liderança do seu povo. Somos numa universidade, somos universitários, somos professores e professoras, doutores e doutoras. Nós devemos zelar, acima de tudo, para que o direito e a justiça prevaleçam. Obrigado pela presença de todos vocês. Eu devolvo a palavra para a doutora Regina, agradecendo de coração pela oportunidade. Obrigado.
Thank you. Muito obrigada, Reverendo. Thank you all. We are proud to have here with us two important professors talking about human rights. I want to thank you, Professor Walter, also to be part of this section. Without further ado, I will introduce Professor Satang Nabaneh, and she will talk with us, and I think it was an amazing webinar. Thank you very much, Satang.
Muito obrigada. Boa tarde. Eu falo muito pouco português. Eu morei em Maputo para 4 meses, mas estou feliz por estar aqui. Okay, now I switch to English. I don't know. Hi, everyone. Thank you again, Regina, Professor Regina, and the University of Dayton School of Law, for the opportunity to engage in this webinar. I am going to share my screen now. I hope everybody can see it. We are talking today about human rights and human rights law. I think my conversation with Professor Rodriguez was that human rights is a lot of things that we can talk about, and we only have less than 1 hour to do so. And so from my side, I decided to focus a little bit on sharing what we do at the Human Rights Center, which is based and housed in the law school, as well as talk a little bit more about the urgency and promise of human rights, which I think links nicely to Professor Rodriguez's conversation later as well. So in terms of just quick background, so I'm the Director of Programs at the Human Rights Center. I am originally from the Gambia, which is West Africa, in West Africa. And that was why I was in Maputo when I was doing my LLM in human rights. And so for my presentation today, as I said, I will give an overview of what we do at the Human Rights Center, say a little bit more, especially with COVID and the need and the urgency of human rights and the promise of human rights. And then I would also like to share a little bit on opportunities that students can get and access with regard to the Human Rights Center. So the Human Rights Center is focused around conducting and advancing human rights through research. So we do a lot of research, both with students as well as with faculty. We are engaged in advocacy and building skills of our partners, both in the US as well as in and outside globally as well. So we do quite a bit of work in Africa and other regions around the world. And one of the key things that we do at the Human Rights Center is educating future lawyers and practitioners in human rights. We need more of this, especially given sort of the climate that we live in right now. As obviously, you know, we are very much rooted and inspired by our Catholic Marianist roots. And that is some of the work that we do in ensuring that the work that we do on human rights, the partnerships that we do and build on, as well as the people that we engage, both lawyers as well as human rights practitioners in the US, outside the US, is really based around sustainable partnership and equitable partnerships. So as I said, at the Human Rights Center, so we mainly focus on key areas. So we really do research around human rights and building capacity around that. I already spoke about education as well as the work that we do on dialogue, because I think, especially in terms of human rights conversations and dialogue, we are very much open to having these conversations with people across divides on various themes. And for instance, recently we've been doing quite a lot of dialogues and conversations around racism and racial issues, especially within the US context, given some of the developments that happened back in 2020. Also wanted to just quickly highlight some of our key initiatives. And as obviously we know, we have a short time, so I'm being very brief. And you know, with all this information is very much accessible on our website. So some of the initiatives that we currently have, for instance, we have Abolition Ohio, which is our key work that we do in the US in relation to anti-trafficking work that we do on human rights, human trafficking, and really focusing on building partnerships and protecting victims and survivors of human trafficking, and working and building coalitions, especially through awareness, advocacy, education, and research. We also have a Human Rights in Africa component, so which is really around, as I said, training future human rights advocates and professionals to apply research. So for instance, we have at the University of Dayton, we're very much into experiential learning opportunities for students. This simply means that having students work with our partners, having students go into communities, doing research, doing advocacy, sort of learning on the, so really trying to bridge the gap between theory and practice, and providing opportunities to students to have practical experiences in terms of doing human rights work. We also have what is called Moral Courage Project, which is really focused around storytelling and sharing examples and stories of people that are doing amazing work around human rights. So really focusing around different themes. So for instance, our theme on the Moral Courage Project this year is around the right to housing, which is you know, the housing crisis is a major issue in the US. So students have been engaged in doing research, documenting, and some of the outcomes or the outputs of this project will be a documentary, will be a website, will be a podcast, as well as exhibition. We also have two other things as well. The Romero Human Rights Award, for instance, is an award that we give to individuals who are doing work around human rights around the world. We also have the Social Practice of Human Rights, which is a conference that we hold every 2 years, a global conference that we bring together human rights practitioners around the globe. We had one in December of 2021, in which we were focused on human rights after the pandemic. How do we ensure and take forward the human rights work that we're doing? And finally, we'll also have the Visiting Scholar Practitioner. The idea really is, as I said, in terms of exposing our students to human rights practitioners around the world, but also providing opportunity for human rights scholars as well as practitioners that are doing work outside of the US to come into our space to engage with faculty, to engage with students in terms of best practices around doing human rights work. So that's just briefly the Human Rights Center. So as I said, I struggled a little bit in terms of what to focus on for this particular section. As I said, given that when we talk about human rights, it's big, right? So in terms of my background, my focus has been on international human rights law, with a particular focus on the African human rights system, as well as how we can utilize the international human rights framework, including the UN. And I also have a very special focus on women's rights. So these are all things, I mean, each one of these can be a whole topic or a whole class of itself. So we are trying as much as possible to be very brief in that sense. So first of all, I just wanted to highlight, this code, which is the preamble from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation for freedom, justice, peace, and the world. And one of the reasons why I actually highlighted the preamble, I think, is in relation to just taking us back as to it as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted 3 years after the end of the Second World War and the establishment of the United Nations, serves as the foundational document when we talk about human rights globally, right? So this, for instance, the UDHR has become a foundation and has inspired subsequent human rights documents. So for instance, we have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. We also have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and it has also inspired regional human rights convention. So you have the American Convention on Human Rights, you have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, you also have the European Convention on Human and People's Rights, as well as other sub-regional human rights instruments and documents as well. In a sense, I wanted to start from the UDHR because it has not only served to inspire other human rights instruments, but have also transformed even our domestic legal systems, whether in the US, whether in Brazil, whether in other countries around the world, and has really inspired the era for human rights discourse as well. So in a general sense, I think I decided not to focus on a particular thematic issue, but rather, especially, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really affected all of our lives in relation to, this webinar is perhaps a good thing out of it in a sense, but we know that that it has impacted, and highlighted the urgency and the need for human rights and the utilization of human rights, and that's really where I wanted to come in. I think especially the COVID-19 starting around 2020 really highlighted, for instance, during that time we really had, for instance, unprecedented social movements that happened around the world, whether in Chile, whether in Sudan, in the US, we had some movements in Belarus as well as in India with the Indian farmers' protests, all really rooted in human rights and the need to address the issue around inequality, because human rights at the end of the day is really around addressing inequalities in the world. And so the COVID-19 pandemic showed us the utility of using human rights, but also that COVID-19 also exacerbated, for instance, increased inequality, especially for women and girls. So we know that around the world that, gender-based violence rose, the prevalence of gender-based violence rose, where they had to do, for example, from the African continent, we know that, for instance, child and forced marriage, domestic violence, and most of these gender-based violence actually increased because of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And this is much more true as well in the US as well as with other countries around the world as well. So I think at the end of the day as well, it's just acknowledging that, especially for women and girls, that more than half of the population continues to live and be discriminated against just because of their gender. We also know that, especially with regard to challenges and their implications, we know, with what happened in 2020 with George Floyd, as well as the ripple effect of the Black Lives Movement and the protests around the world, that we saw that there is the persistence of racism, but also patriarchy. And when you talk about, quote unquote, I do not like using the word the global South, but the global South, including Africa, as well as all other countries in Central America, in South America, and around the world, that we've also seen the continuous discrimination, especially rooted very much around indifferential power structures in the US, as well as globally as well. And one of the other key things that has really raised the urgency of human rights is increase in authoritarianism and repression that we've seen around the world. So whether it has to do with freedom of speech, for instance, freedom of movement, and other things that we've seen around the world, even in democratically elected governments, we've seen increasing authoritarianism and repression and violations of human rights in relation to human rights generally. We've also seen, and this is much more true, we've also seen the rise of misinformation and fake news. But I think, especially within this context, and I'm happy to engage more in terms of this, we've seen the rise of the anti-rights alliances around the world, whether in the US as well as in other countries as well, that is very much rooted around issues of white supremacy culture in the US and beyond. But I think part of what we've also seen as well is the unchecked corporate power. So we know that corporations are becoming more powerful. Corporations are, and that has given rise to walk around business and human rights, for instance, and the need to pay more attention to how business relates to human rights violations as well as new technologies. But I think most importantly, we've seen around the global impact of the climate crisis, knowing that, the biggest threat to our survival as a species is climate change, right? And we've seen its impact on human rights, especially on the most marginalized and vulnerable groups of population. I'm just going to look at my time to see that I am on time, that I'm not taking too much. And so I think for me, really, this was just a matter of, highlighting the challenges that we're facing and the need for human rights and how we can, and the big question then becomes, how do we move forward? And part of it is, and I know Walter will talk about the LLM program. We'll talk about the partnership that we have with McKinsey, but also it's a key part of that is really educating the next generation of lawyers, the next generation of human rights practitioners in relation to knowing, for instance, that international legal avenues, whether at the UN or at the regional level in terms of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, or even at the African level in terms of the African Commission, and how to use these international human rights avenues to document abuse, right? To document human rights violations and to put our government, and to put government at the forefront in terms of putting them to answer questions for us to act as watchdogs. So this is really why it is important for us, especially at the Human Rights Center, to engage with the law school, to engage with the master's program in relation to the work that we are currently doing as well. And I think one of the other things that we've also noticed, especially around social movements and the work that is being done, is really in terms of intersectional solidarity. And the idea really is in terms of how do we foster and build solidarity across our global divides, right? Across, between the US and Brazil, between Brazil and African countries, between Brazil and Asia, and how to foster this, because we know that, as I said, we know that one of the key challenges that we have with human rights is with regard to new technologies, but we also know that there is so much value as well in technologies as well. So a good example is, for example, at the Human Rights Center, we work with the American Association of the Social Sciences in terms, and along with our students, in terms of using new technology, which is called GIS, for instance, to document human rights violations in Myanmar, in South Sudan, and all of those things, destructions of property, as well as in other cases as well. But I think I also wanted to highlight that what we've also realized, especially at the University of Dayton, and our commitment from the highest level in relation to human rights, is that universities, whether it's Mackenzie, whether it's the University of Dayton, as well as other universities, have a major role to play in terms of promoting human rights for our students, in terms of ensuring that our students do not just know about human rights, that we do not only have human rights courses for students to take, but that we are also providing students that opportunity to engage in real human rights work. And that is why the Human Rights Center, as I said, really provides an opportunity where we give students the opportunity to work with human rights organizations around the world, to do work that is important, to know that the work, that the education that they're undertaking goes beyond just having a degree at the end of the day or having a certificate, and that people can make real life differences as well. And that is really why we are very much interested in bridging the gap between theory and practice, between academia and activism. And that is why we are very much engaged with, with our community partners with regard to providing our community partners as well and organizations that we work with in the US as well as beyond, to equip them with the skills as well as with the tools and resources to engage in human rights work and amplify the amazing work that is being done on the ground. I just wanted to highlight that I think part of what we've also realized is that, expats, that's including lawyers, do a lot of work in relation to human rights work. But I think one of the key things that we sometimes forget is that everyday people are also enacting human rights, are doing human rights on the grounds. And as lawyers, as people who are, have the resources and the tools, can also amplify the work that is being done on the ground in relation to human rights generally as well. And I also, I already spoke about the use of digital technology and the work that we are doing with AAAS as well. But I think in a sense as well, it's just also reimagining what human rights practice might look like. Human rights, I know, is great. It is useful, both in terms of advocacy, both in terms of ensuring justice and peace in relation to the world. But it's also acknowledging, the power structures that also, and the practices that it is not without criticism. There are valid criticism around the human rights framework about how we do human rights, which is also for us to rethink, especially people that are engaged in human rights work, to think of how we alter human rights practices as well as redistribute power, especially in relation to work that is being done in quote unquote developing countries as well as with developed countries as well. And I just wanted to highlight, for instance, the UN Secretary General's note around how the pandemic, and this was really when I started talking about how the pandemic shines a light on human rights, but it is also an opportunity for us to rethink of human rights in terms of its transformative and redistributive power in terms of rebuilding, rebuilding the world, especially, well, I shouldn't say after COVID because we are still in COVID era, but how we can really rebuild in relation to that as well. And then finally, I also wanted to highlight that, and I know that Walter is going to talk about the program as well, but just that, whilst the LLM is an online LLM, and that mostly students are virtual as well, that the Human Rights Center has opportunities that students can engage in. One is we do have a graduate or a law fellowship that we do in the summer, in which we give students a certain amount of money that they can develop and implement research or advocacy projects on human rights anywhere in the world. So this will be a great opportunity for students as well. But the other opportunities that we also have is that we also do have student workers who are paid to work with our partners. And I just mentioned a few here that are very much related to law and human rights. So we have Project Expedite Justice, which does legal work in Sudan. They work virtually. They are an organization that is based in the US. We have the Business and Human Rights Internship, which is remote. The Business and Human Rights Resource Center is based in New York, but it works globally in terms of work around business and human rights. I said there is so much work now that is being done around, corporate work, corporations and human rights. And this is really a great opportunity for law students that might be interested in doing this work remotely. We also have other opportunities, such as with the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa, a human rights organization that does work at the regional level. So do strategic litigation with the African Court, as well as the Institute for Human Rights and Development in Africa, which also does strategic litigation. These are just a few examples of opportunities that the Human Rights Center has for law students. And I hope that, those that are participating in this webinar can engage and with the platform. I'm also happy to answer any questions as well. I'll stop here. Hopefully I didn't go too long. As well, as I said, when we talk about human rights, it's a broad area. And I thought perhaps, reiterating, I am not saying anything new, but reiterating the urgency and the need and the need for human rights, especially within the times that we find ourselves, is very much important. Muito obrigado. Thank you.
Thank you very much. very interesting. So now, Professora Geisa Rodrigues from Mackenzie University will talk for make us her presentation. Thank you, Professora Geisa.
Hello, everyone. I'd like, first of all, to thank the organizers of this meeting, Professor Regina, Professor Walter, for inviting me here today and to be here together with Professor Satang Nabane. It's really an honor, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm thinking of things we can do together. It's really a positive consequence of this pandemic, really being so near São Paulo and Ohio, and we are far, but we are together, and we can really make bridges so that we can have this joint and collaborative activities together. And really, in a way, although this is really very useful and important, but I really do hope we can meet each other, not only Professor Satang, Professor Walter, and I hope you visit our campus, and we probably, other Mackenzie teachers, go and visit Dayton University in person, and we have this relationship in person one day. For those of you who don't know me already, my name is Geisa Rodrigues, and I'm responsible for some undergraduate courses on fundamental rights at Mackenzie's Law School. And I'm one of the coordinators of the Mackenzie Legal Advice Clinic, which is based in a shelter called Arsenal da Esperança. So we really do some activities and deliver legal advice to homeless people, and we're going to talk about it in a while. I've divided my presentation in two main parts. I wanted it to be simple because really we are here to listen to our colleagues from University of Dayton. So these two main parts. First, I will present an overview of how we study fundamental human rights at Mackenzie and making a context of how human rights is important to Brazil and how we deal with it, briefly, of course, our legal framework of human rights. Then I will focus more on access to justice as a fundamental right, because we work on this at this clinic that we coordinate. So Brazilian law schools, differently from North American, US law schools, only began to focus on human rights studies from 1988 onwards. So in a sense, I think we are really in the infancy in the childhood of these studies, because we have always been universities very formal, just like Portugal type. We are colonized and have our roots and cultural ties with Portugal, and we really inherited a kind of classroom and a very theoretical presentation. Of course, you have to think also that in Brazil, previously to 1988, we have a dictatorship. We have had not only the military dictatorship, but we have also a civil dictatorship before, in the final searches to the 1945. So we have this authoritarian culture. And of course, human rights they flourish when you have democracy. And we didn't have democracy. We have torture on the opponents, political opponents. We have many racism and patriarchy. All of these were combined and not debated in our schools. So our law schools began to debate this on 1988. So this is something very important, or at least openly and in a more structured way. from 1988. Of course, we had always had our pioneers, people who defended and struggled and stood up for their rights, relating human rights, but in a very institutional way. It was the other day. It was very recently in 1988. So because the 1988 Federal Constitution is a remarkable turning point in Brazilian contemporary legislation. So it was conceived through a very participative process, and it's known as the Citizen Constitution. So this is something very important. This is a landmark of our legislative and production in terms of human rights. It brought new chapters. The Constitution brought new chapters totally addressed to the protection of fundamental rights. New institutions were created, were conceived, related to the promotion of these rights, and new remedies were also established. So it was a very important legislation reform, which really needed to bring a revolution in terms of human rights. Let's talk about human rights. Let's ensure the reinforcement of human rights. We need human rights. Brazil needs a human rights focus to be a real democracy and to deliver what the people need in terms of equality and fairness. We were inspired by Iberian constitutions, Portuguese and Spanish constitutions, because Portugal and Spain, they had also faced new constituent process after the end of dictatorial regimes. We, in Brazil, we have in constitutionalism an inspiration in North American constitutionalism. Our first Republican Constitution in 1891 was a constitution really inspired in the 78-7 Constitution of the America, or the first constitution, the only constitution you have. So we have this inspiration, but we are so different countries and had different backgrounds, and this time we, of course, kept the previous cultural legacy we had in terms of juridical influences, but we really turned to these two countries that were forging a new society, that were based on the dictatorships. So this was very important for us at that moment. After the Constitution, a very fertile legislative period began. So many important laws and acts were launched concerning fundamental rights, such as just a brief list of the most important legislative laws that were really produced at this time, after the Constitution. A consumer code, environmental laws, very important environmental laws protecting our very rich biodiversity, a child protection statute, a law regarding violence against women called Maria da Penha, after the woman who really fought in favor of this law, a statute for the elderly, a racial equality statute, a statute for disabled people, and laws enacting public health education policies. So we, after 1988, we really started creating this legal framework to promote human rights. It was really, I could say, a task for my generation and for previous generations. And it was something that really although we have so many difficulties still, it was something that I'm proud about. I'm proud of taking part and participate in this process. Moreover, in Brazil, the core documents, it's not the same, we couldn't say the same of the United States, but the core documents in the global and inter-American system of human rights protection were signed and ratified by Brazil after this period and some before, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which happened in 1991, the International Covenant on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Unhuman, Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Forced Disappearance, a problem that we had, unfortunately, in times of dictatorship, military dictatorship, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, international environmental treaties regarding UNESCO, FAO, ILO, and important inter-American documents, including the American Convention on Human Rights, legal framework related to human rights. The Mackenzie University undergraduate program offers students of this constitutional and legal framework and promotes debates on human rights from the national and international perspective. Whether it's on our classrooms, whether on our researches, whether on our clinics. So we don't have a human rights center as Dayton have, and it's a very good idea indeed, but we have this human rights approach throughout our whole curriculum. And so this is something that really, and we have had many reforms after 1988 Constitution and updated our academic scope to this human rights protection approach. So this is something very important to stress because it's something that, thank God, has been happening all around the university in Brazil. But we still have so many challenges to face. Although Brazil has a broad and detailed human rights legal framework, we still have many challenges to face in order to reinforce human rights for all. Some even say there are some constitutionalists in Brazil, people who study our constitution, such as Marcelo Neves, who is a very important constitution professor here. He says that part of this legislation has a merely symbolic role, something which happens when there is an expansion of the political symbolic dimension. You know that any law has a political symbolic dimension, but when it's so expanded, this political symbolic dimension of the law, in detriment to the normative legal function. Perhaps this is something difficult for Dayton's professors or students in Dayton to grasp, because we have this situation that's very unequal. Perhaps, Professor, you have some difficulty understanding this, perhaps because in the more developed countries, it's not the same. The rule of law is more or less for everybody. But in a peripheral country like Brazil, citizenship is conditioned by the obstructive and destructive interference of political and economical particularities in the reproduction of the law. And so we have so-called under-integrated citizens, people who only have duties in our society, or they have rights, but less rights than others. When you, in comparison with others, they have less rights. And this is something which is an appalling reality. But on the other hand, we have so-called over-integrated citizens. That is, those who not only enjoy and really are protected, have protection, real protection to all the rights, they enjoy all the rights. There are available in the system that are contained, that are promoted by the Constitution and other laws. But not only this, but they also have the resources not to obey the law when it does not match with their interests. Those who are effectively above the law. So their human rights are really protected. And as they can be above the law, they tend to not to respect other people's lives. And the state is still fragile to face this challenge. All those inequalities in social and economic standards impact human rights in Brazil. And they are really a part of our academic studies in our classrooms, in our research. We have many researches about these inequalities and how they impact our experience of human rights, the experience of human rights in the level of the median citizen. It's really impacted by this. And we're also we also develop projects as I think is expected in a university which promotes its social role, mainly as a Christian institution. We all know the importance of the Christian doctrine to the foundation of the human rights theories. So we feel responsible as a Christian institution to deal with these inequalities and to think about it, the way they impact the human rights in our country. So access to justice is a prerequisite of a fair and equal society. Access to justice is one of the fundamental rights we study and we talk about at Mackenzie. It's protected as a human right by the 1988 Brazilian Constitution. We know that access to justice has two possible perspectives. In lato sensu, the right to access to justice means the right to access an equitable legal system. And in stricto sensu, comprehends access to information about your own rights and access to courts in order to have your disputes resolved in a fair and public hearing. No matter the perspective on the right to access to justice, it plays a big role in the protection and enforcement of other fundamental rights. Social inequalities in Brazil, and I think all around the world, really challenge the effectiveness of the right to justice, which implies obstacles to the enforcement of all rights. So if you don't have access to justice, it really implies that you have very little access to any right. Law schools, we think here at Mackenzie, and as I saw Professor Satang's explanation and very good presentation, I understand, I assume Dayton University has the same comprehension, that we have a social responsibility to teach human rights, not only in this theoretical perspective, but with a practical scope in a country like Brazil. And I know, although the United States is a very developed country, is one, the OECD branch, one of the most unequal as well. The Mackenzie Presbyterian, this is why we developed this legal advice clinic. We call Arsenal de Esperança in English. We could say Hope Arsenal. And it's a university extension project through which our students provide always under academic supervision, legal advice in any field that, in any branch of law that is demanded by the people who seeks for legal advice to vulnerable people These people, they are sheltered in Nacional da Esperança, which is a shelter, and it was a choice to go there and to be near them to deliver this academic service. Our objectives, and I would then try to show just some photos for you to see. Our objectives are basically to enhance access to justice. We know that we are not it's not a revolutionary project. In São Paulo, unfortunately, we have almost 30,000 people living on the street. It's really a very terrible situation we are facing, and aggravated by the COVID-19. So we have this big problem, and we know that we aren't going to solve this problem just with this clinic, but we try to help people. And I think it's very important when we think about human rights that we have this, and I think Professor Satan showed with us, we have this international approach, we have the national approach, we have the local approach. All of them have to be tied, connected, but all of them are very important. And we have to have initiatives associated with all this level. And so this is a local level activity, but I think we have had very good real evaluation from the people we are really attending, and from the students as well. So we want to enhance the way we can their access to justice for these people who are facing homelessness through legal advising, because they have so many problems combed, and it's somewhere. And when they are strong enough to start to seek legal advice, it's a way. And you really see people who then they get to work, they start really rebuilding their lives from this point of view, and it's a real pleasure and a real honor to have people just to rebuild their life. But while we do this, we develop our students to learn to write legal advice, abilities, professional skills. But we also know that we are impacting them, their citizenship. They are starting to think about Brazilians' problem and São Paulo's problems, and really enhancing to their citizenship and their social responsibility. So we know that the university has this purpose to make them debate what is happening in our society. So it's an ongoing project launched in 2018. We have helped more than 300 individuals in need of legal advice, qualified 280 students in legal counseling, produced 11 legal guidelines lifts, and these guidelines are going to widen the impacts of the project because they are offered to other universities and other social welfare units in São Paulo and all along Brazil. And despite the obstacles presented by COVID-19, we had many problems with COVID-19 because you can imagine it's a population that doesn't have access to digital technologies. So they don't have cell phones, they don't have computers, they depend on the institutional computer. And there was a time that they couldn't go out. So we had this difficulty of communication with this. But nowadays, this semester, we almost back to our pre-pandemic standards, thank God. So I'm really looking forward to collaboration with Dayton University on the teaching of human rights. I think there is much room for cooperation. And my final word is just to say, to talk about an experience we had here with comparative law. We had a comparative law student conference that take part. We had already 3 conferences that London South Bank University took part, Egypt, British Egypt took part, and our students, just to talk about human rights. It's a remote activity, and we prepare the students, and then they talk with each other, and then they really change, their data, their social media, and social nets. They really get much more connected, and it's something very simple, easy, and not affordable for us just to make with our students. I think we have many things we can really do together, and I'm really when you are talking about a project, Satang, I really think there is room for us to think what we can do together. And I think this is very important that we have in this faculty level the cooperation being the project, all the formalities of our cooperation, but the cooperation really happens in this personal level of teachers and students. So I'm really happy to take part in this project, and we have read our emails, and I think we really can think something, start thinking something to happen for next year with our students. And I really noted this remote business and human rights resource center. I think we could start by this. I don't know. And I really appreciate the attention you all had to my presentation. And really, your Portuguese was very nice, Satan. And I hope my English was enough for you to understand. This is, we are not bilingual. We are really, we really make an effort to speak the best we can. But I think when writing and other activities, we are much better than speaking, which is normal with no-native speakers. But I'm really looking forward to this cooperation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Geisa. It was an amazing presentation again. Thank you very much. And now, Professor Walter, are you here? The students are waiting for your explanation about our partnership. So there are a lot of questions or observations in the chat. So be our guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Regina, and thank you for Professor Satang and Professor Geisa for your presentations. Such an interesting topic and so broad. I'm sure we could be here talking for a long time. So maybe that's a reason to think about other webinars we could do on this topic. Very, very interesting. And I also thank you, Regina, for helping pull this webinar together. We are delighted to be here. I will just take a few minutes to talk about the online LLM collaboration, which is really the core of our partnership and where it all began. This is the director of the online LLM program, Margaret Inedis. I'd like to introduce Margaret. She is the key person in the program. Margaret really has built the program from the beginning. She oversees the day-to-day operations of the program. She is a licensed lawyer in immigration. She has practiced in immigration law and has taught legal and research writing. And she has been working in the online LLM space since about 2014. Margaret has her JD and a master's in foreign service from Georgetown University, and she is licensed on the Florida bar. She also speaks fluent Spanish and Greek. A little bit of background on the University of Dayton for those of you who may not know us well. Our university was founded over 100 years ago in 1850. We were recognized as a top-tier national university and one of the 10 best Catholic universities in the United States. We have about 11,000 students. We are a major research university, and we are located on a beautiful campus of 388 acres on the southern border of the city of Dayton, Ohio. We are accredited by the American Bar Association and by the North Central Association of Colleges and Secondary Schools. The LLM is in American and transnational law. Historically, students would complete this LLM degree by studying on campus in Ohio. But in 2019, work began before that, but in 2019, we launched the online delivery of this program. The purpose was to increase, to expand the accessibility and the affordability of an LLM degree for students from all over the world. The program was, from its inception, designed for online delivery. So it actually predated the pandemic. So the design of the program from its inception was for online delivery. And for those students who complete all 30 credits of the program, they also earn a certificate in US law and legal practice. Currently, we have over 80 students from all over the world in the program. In terms of the partnership highlights between the University of Dayton School of Law and Mackenzie, the accessibility to the program can be for students who are still studying their first degree in law. For those students, they would have to have completed 7 semesters of their bachelorette coursework to be eligible to apply for the program. Also, master's students, postgraduate students, and alumni all qualify for the benefits of the program. For those who are alumni, they can place out of 1/3 of the LLM credits. Basically, 10 credits of advanced standing are granted for those students who enter the program who already have their first degree in law. As I said, the program is 30 credits. So that would mean if 10 credits of advanced standing are granted, the student would need to study 20 credits of the program, which is approximately 8 courses. As a result of the partnership, and one of the key benefits is a guaranteed scholarship for Mackenzie students and alumni. And that reduces the cost for studying the online LLM significantly. The guaranteed scholarship is equivalent to $762 per credit. That's a reduction of $762 from the standard per credit tuition rate of $1,274, which means on a per credit basis, a student would only pay $512 per credit to study the degree. At 20 credits, that would mean approximately $10,000 US dollars, is $10,300 US dollars is what it would cost to study the degree. For those students who are still finishing their first degree in law, as I mentioned earlier, they also would be eligible for 10 credits, 10 transfer credits from their first degree in law. We have worked with Mackenzie to do the course mapping to identify those courses that would correspond to the courses in our curriculum to earn those 10 credits. This is the table of those courses. And again, as I mentioned, for master's, postgraduate, and continuing education students, as well as alumni, the advanced standing of 10 credits is applied directly towards the LLM degree. So again, they may select 20 credits from any of the online LLM courses. 12 of the 20 credits that are studied must include the required courses in the program. Those courses include the Introduction to US Law, Legal Analysis, Civil Procedure, Constitutional Law, the diploma is the exact same diploma that a student would earn if they were studying on campus in Ohio. The important thing, and I get asked this question often, is does the diploma say that it was studied online? It does not. It's the exact same diploma that a student would earn studying on law for this degree, studying on campus for this degree. These are the 12 courses of the curriculum. Those that are shown in green text are the required courses that I just mentioned. The others are the elective courses that students can choose from. The 5 required courses must be taken in order to earn the degree. We have 3 admission cycles during the course of a calendar year. So we have 3 semesters, if you will, within the course of a calendar year. The first begins in January, the second begins in early May, and the third begins in late August. The next, we have just completed the admissions for the semester beginning at the end of this month. So the next semester would be the January semester, which begins on January 6th of 2023. Students who are interested in applying for that, for admission for that semester would need to have completed applications to us by November 30th of this year. Also, once a student enters the online LLM program, they have up to 3 years to complete the degree. You can reach out to us directly, either myself or Margaret. And what we like to do is schedule an in-person one-on-one video interview so that we can answer all of your questions and make sure that you have all of the detailed information about the program and the application process. So feel free to send us an email, call us or text us, and we can set up that initial discussion. We're adding a new course that I thought I'd make everybody aware of today, a new elective course to the program, and it will be offered this semester. That's starting at the end of August. This is a 1-credit elective course, and it's a human rights course, so I thought it would be relevant to this audience. Our professor, Carlos Bernal, will be teaching this course on inter-American human rights law and comparative constitutional law. If you're interested, please follow the link at the bottom of this slide and you can get all the information. We do have a number of students in the program already, and so we welcome more Mackenzie students into the online LLM program. These are 2 that have been in the program for about 18 months now, and there are many more. That's it. Hopefully I have finished on time. It looks like we have about 5 minutes left, Professor Regina, for question and answers for both professors and or for myself on the program. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one question from Elena. Professor, how can we send our application? And do you prefer an email or text, Professor?
All of the application documents, except for the official academic transcripts, can be sent to us by email. As I mentioned earlier, the best thing to do is reach out by email to me or Margaret. We will set up a meeting and I will walk you through the entire application process. It's not too complicated. And from there, I will send you the application form and you can begin to submit your documents by email.
Another question.
Regina,
okay.
can I walk just a question about the requirement of the language, the level of the, I think it's something important for the students to understand.
That's a great question, Professor Jeza, thank you. Yes, there is an English proficiency requirement in for the course. And we say that the requirement is that there's English proficiency. And the way that works is, and that's part of the reason that the video interviews are useful, because we get a chance to converse with the prospective students in English in an interview. then we sort of guide them. If their proficiency is felt to be strong enough, then they have the opportunity to write, as part of their application materials, a request for waiver of supplying a TOEFL or an IELTS standard English proficiency exam. If it's maybe not so strong, then we would require the English proficiency exam.
Thank you. We have another question here. Do we have to pay before or during the course?
That's also a great question. Thank you for that one. I get that question a lot. No, the way it works is you pay as you go. So depending on the number of credits that you enroll in for that semester, you pay for those credits. And that's why the program was designed to offer flexibility to the students. In other words, a highly motivated student might just need to study those 8 courses to get the 20 credits to earn the degree, because he's already got the 10 credits of advanced standing, for example. He could, he or she could complete that course of study probably in a calendar year through 3 semesters. And as long as they have the means to be able to pay for that, then that's a very flexible way to do it. Another student might want to stretch it out. Maybe they're working full time, they can only handle 1 or 2 courses at a time, and economically it makes more sense to be able to stretch it out over 2 or possibly 3 years. And so that's what went into the design, and the idea that you have up to 3 years to complete the degree from the time that you begin. Now, I would add, because I'm quite familiar with Brazil, having worked there in my professional life, we do not offer installment payments. And so when I say that it's pay as you go, you do have to pay the total tuition due for that semester at the beginning of the semester.
Okay, we have another one from Elena. Do we need to do a test or just the interview?
No, there's no test required. The interview is the best way to initiate the process. And the only standard test that may be required, as I just explained, would be the English proficiency exam, a TOEFL, if we feel that that's required. If through the interviews we feel the English proficiency is of a high enough level, the student has the opportunity to request a waiver to having to provide that exam. Did I say that clearly? Yes, okay.
I think it finished. Do we have another one, another question?
Sure. I would offer also to clarify that for eligibility to the program, the requirement is that you have your first degree in law. And so, the idea that in designing the program was that, yes, a master's student or a postdoc student or an alumnus would have their first degree in law. But we opened it up a little wider to say even students who have completed those 7 semesters of their undergraduate degree, their LLB or the bacharel, right, would be eligible to apply and be admitted on the condition that they do complete their bacharel, and they would have to do so before we can confer the LLM degree. But it allows them to get started on the LLM while they're finishing their bacharel.
Okay, thank you. So it's time, it's 7 p.m. So I would like to thank you all for being in our webinar. Satan and Geisa, special thanks for your presentation. Thank you, Walter, and have a great Wednesday. And see you next month when we will have another webinar on law and technology. So pay attention, and then we will be together again. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.